Hello, welcome back to our journey through the strategic work of design and planning that we can do in educational settings, which are typically, of course, for non-for-profit organizations and frameworks, and therefore meet different challenges, criteria, and outcomes than the typical business strategic plan, if you will. Today, I'm going to talk about change management. And why am I talking about this? Well, I'm talking about change management when we're talking about strategic planning and strategic design, because usually we do strategy when the organization is facing the need to change. Now, why need to change? A few options. One, there's a challenge or a crisis. And something needs to be done. For example, realign the organization, create new goals, design a new mission, realign the organization, right? So that's one, if there's a change or a crisis. Second, when there's a voluntary change, not just a crisis, but for example, a change of management or leadership that may come with a new agenda or a new goal, and they will implement a new strategic vision for the organization. So that's another option. Another option would be that we're making a new or creating a new organization or a new unit within an existing organization, which again means that we're doing some kind of a change. We're changing something from nothing to something, or within an organization, we're redefining and reshuffling positions and opportunities and resources and positions and authority and whatnot. So basically, implementing a new strategy means managing change, doing like something different in the organization. And that means that we may meet some resistance to change, which is, a concept you may be familiar with at this point. And this management means that we are not just fixing something on the go, but we're making some kind of an essential core change to the organization, which means there's going to be a lot of tension, potential for resistance, and things can go wrong. And my third point is probably the most important one, because resistance to change is not necessarily the biggest problem that we have when we do strategy. And the third point, as you can see, says good ideas may get the wrong application. And that's basically how do we make a good idea work as it should or work as it can work, fulfilling the full potential of an idea or a new direction for work. And this is a very big issue, because sometimes when you're fixing something or you come up with a very good idea and you go like, all right, this can work. By the time it's implemented and it's a part of the organization, it becomes a big obstacle. And I guess that most of us have experienced it in one way or another, that something good actually becomes, or a good idea on paper becomes a very bad idea or a very bad practice in the organization. So how do we avoid this? And the general wisdom, the general organizational wisdom basically says work strategically. Don't just focus on the point of change. Look at how the entire system might be influenced or shaped impacted by the change that you're implementing. So that's a big idea here. Let's see how it's done. So strategic change management is an organizational process that involves planning and implementing significant adjustments within an organization to enhance the performance, market position, or operational effectiveness. That is, make a core, essential change for the better. These changes align with the company's long-term objectives or strategic vision. And that's very important to say. It's not just change. It's change that emanates or comes from a different or a new mission and vision for a group of people or an organization. When you're looking at strategic change management, it is usually of one type, and that's the transformational change. But let's look at two types of changes that are defined when it comes to implementing a change in the organization. The adaptive changes are basically responsive. That is, something happens, the reality changes, and we have to make some adjustments or adopt a change in order to survive, evolve, and succeed. I think that, for example, in many organizations, this is the type of reaction that we've seen to technology implementation. So, working long distance, adopting AI tools, etc. These are adaptive changes. We do not change who we are and what we do, but we're doing it a bit differently. We're incorporating new methods and new systems to make things more effective, to make things better. This is rarely a strategic change. In most cases, transformational changes are considered strategic change. And what do we mean by that? First of all, transformational changes are at a larger scale or scope than the adaptive changes. That is, they touch almost every system and every part of the organization. And they change core aspects of the organization, not just how the organization works, but what it does. Okay, so for example, let's take the same idea, all right, of implementing AI or other technologies in organizations. So some organizations say we'll do the same thing, we'll have the same employees, but they'll work with new tools that will make them more effective. Excellent. Other companies go and say, we're making a transformational change. For example, we no longer have employees that use AI. We have AI that uses employees. Actually, our employees are not working. They are training AI. They're not doing the work itself. They're not producing anything. They're not providing services. They train the AI systems so the AI systems can do the work. Now, this is a novel approach. You can say it's a very bad one, it's a very good one, it's going to be horrible for the future or wonderful for the future, but it's a different way of looking at the organization. We're no longer using tools to help the employees do what they do. We're actually using the employees to create a new type of doing things in the organization, supporting a new way of doing things in the organization, a new entity that will do things differently, and of course might change the need in employees at all in the future. All right, so that's an example. But of course, we can think of numerous other ways of looking at how transformational change take place. Again, I think that the ability to pinpoint and say, okay, that's transformational, that's not, is two things. One, how broadly you can see the influence of that change in the organization. The more systems and the more frameworks and the more aspects of the organization that are influenced, the more likely it's a transformational one. And then if the change touches not just how things are done in the organization, but what is done in the organization and who's doing it. When we're looking at effective plans for change in organizations, when we're doing strategy, we need to look at these four core aspects. Okay, the elements of effective plans for change at the strategic level. First of all is, of course, start with the strategic goals. If you have a problem, don't start with the solutions. Start with what am I trying to achieve by solving these problems? Or I'm having a crisis. The crisis emanates from me doing things that are no longer needed or no longer effective. Okay, what do I need to do and how do I need to do it to remain effective, of added value, etc., relevant, and so on? Okay, so we start with a strategic view, a broad picture of what is it that we're trying to achieve. Then we're defining key performance indicators, KPI. This is like a very important term or concept in the field of organizational behavior, organizational development, or counseling. So, any field that touches people in organizations and how we make changes in the organizations touches this. And it basically says we need to define milestones across our road to change that tells us, okay, by that point, we need to achieve that much. So we need to have like measurable indicators of success or failure along the road to achieving our goals. So we're doing a strategic goal and then we're measuring back from that goal. Okay, what are the intermediate goals or targets that we need to achieve and how can we measure them or assess them so that we know that we are on the right path, achieving the right things, or something's wrong, we need to change, improve, etc. We need to inform and recruit the collaboration and the goodwill of stakeholders and the team. Stakeholders are basically anyone with interest in what's going on in the organization. For example, in businesses, it's usually, people with stocks, the stock owners, the government, the owners of the organization, legal entities that touch the way we do business, and so on. But when it comes to educational systems, it's a bit different. It could be the local municipality, the government, Ministry of Education. It can be the communities that we serve, so the parents of the children or the community in general, and so on. So we involve stakeholders and the team that's relevant. And you may ask, Leo, what's involving the stakeholders or team? What does it mean? Well, there's only one rule in that. The more collaboration you get, the more likely you are to get your results okay. In other words, it's one way to just inform people. We're going to do this, just so you know, good luck to us all. That's the lowest level. Okay? Then the next level is, oh, I'd like your input on my plan. So here's a plan, here's an idea. What do you say? That's better than nothing, but it's still not very collaborative. The best way to actually do this is involve the stakeholders and the team, or at least their representatives, in the very beginning of the process. So we are going to make a change. We're going to think of a new strategic way of doing things in our organization, and we're putting together a team. And we want that team to include management and external counselors and stakeholders, if possible, all of them, and if not possible, then representatives, and the same with the team. If it's a small team, all the team is involved. If it's a large team, then of course just representatives, but people that we know that will be able to represent the ideas and the interests of the team in that setting. Okay? And of course, to make it effective, we need to decide on the project scope. That is, when do we start and when do we finish? Otherwise, it's like doing renovation in your house. You know how it begins, you never know how it ends and how much it costs. And we can't afford to do this when it comes to either business or nonprofit schools. You cannot get into a change project that never ends and that never gets to the result. And that's a big risk. That's a big risk. So we had to define in advance, like we're doing the strategic goals and the key performance indicators. When do we stop? When do we say, okay, when we reach this point, the change is implemented and we can look forward to whatever it is, so that it doesn't become like an endless project. What are the signs and indicators that the project has reached its goals and now can be implemented fully? And then we can, look around and see if we need to do something else. We need to improve, we need to draw some conclusions, or just say, okay, everything's fine, let's continue. So when we're doing this, we can do this on many aspects and forms. And this will sound a little bit like the McKinsey model. You remember the McKinsey model of strategic change or strategy? That we have like different, I think it's called like the 7S's. Remember? You can enter the organization and do strategic thinking and reasoning and planning in different ways and from different angles. The same way you can look at it as means of making a change in the organization. So first of all, of course, change in the organizational structure. Once you change the structure, you change the function. You change who's doing what and how. Of course, so a lot of organizational change is often involving at least a facet or an aspect of changing the structure of the organization, changing the units, changing the hierarchical structure, adding new departments, or erasing and reshuffling departments, and so on. It has to do with redefining roles, resources allocation, and of course, authority to improve information flow and decision-making processes so things are more effective. That's one way of doing it. Changes in the business model, all right? So basically, maybe I'm doing business in one way or I'm doing something in one way. It doesn't work anymore. I'm changing the way I'm doing it. Now, how does it translate into the world of educational organizations. Well, imagine a state in which, or a situation in which a school is not popular anymore. It has a problem. So what do we do with this? We either shut it down, or we can change the business model. Maybe we'll turn it into a specialized school, a school that is for the entire region, or whatever. So we're rebuilding the function and the mission, basically, of the school. Changes in strategic focus or market, that is, who are our target customers or clients or community that we serve. And again, you can think about it in terms of, for example, a local school or a regional school. A school that focuses only on the children, and the parents can stay informed but nothing more, or a more community oriented school where the parents are part of decision making, they're part of the community, they are involved in teaching and learning and activities and whatnot. Technological change is something very common in our reality. As technology changes and advances in an ever growing pace, we're basically facing strategic change in how we do things, not necessarily what we do, but how we do things. Think of AI, think of working from long distance, so working by Zoom, teaching by Zoom or Teams, etc. Think about how many changes have occurred in your own practice and work as a result of implementing new technologies, new abilities, and so on. Me being, a wise old guy, I remember a time where, even in higher education, computers were not a part of my experience as a student, even at the university. And when computers were as simple as word processors, okay? Text processors. If you do this and you don't have to, type your work, you don't have to send your work by mail and wait for 2 weeks for it to arrive and then come back, but you send it by email. These were giant steps in making the work flow better, the communication more effective, your ability to revise and review your work, your own work and other people's work in a way that people did not imagine at all back then. Another change that's very difficult, but still a lot of people try to do this, is cultural or behavioral change. Basically, it means that we're still doing the same thing. We're still believing in the same reason of being, if you will. Our mission remains the same, but we're doing it differently. We're doing it differently. So, for example, some decades ago, a decade and a half ago or so, many of the government offices that provide services to citizens, so Ministry of Interior, Ministry of Treasury, and so on, provide services to the public, right? They give you tax refunds, they give you IDs, they give you passports, and so on. And it used to be very difficult to get services from government offices. You couldn't get an appointment. If you got an appointment, you had to wait for the whole day to see a very grumpy clerk who would basically send you away because you don't have the right documents. Today, it's all done online, so technology, but it's also a fact that there's no one clerk in a government office that does not get very intense and very intensive customer service training. Now, are they all, sunny, happy people when you come to them? No, not necessarily. But basically, the chance of a citizen coming to, whatever office and getting a better service is much higher today than it was 15 years ago. So someone made a decision that the government needs to be more focused on giving proper service to their citizens, which is a change in both the behavior and the culture. So the citizen is not someone disturbing my peace as a worker. No, he's the person I need to provide service to. That's a change in the philosophy of work, although you do still the very same things. And of course, changes in leadership and management practices. A lot of what we call strategic change emanates from leadership and government and management decisions. So executive orders, if you will, a new government comes, or a new leadership comes, or a new boss comes into a unit and they say, okay, I have new ideas. I don't think like my predecessor. I think we're going to do things a bit differently. And they may be one of the biggest reasons for strategic implementation, changes in culture or behavioral, implementing new technology, and blah, 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 blah. So basically, these types of change are all intertwined. All right, there are different aspects of the same phenomenon, and often when we're thinking strategically, we have to look at all of them. How will the change affect or work through each one of these prisms, if you will, when you're looking at the organization? How do we manage change? Remember when I talked about, in our last unit, I talked about uh, resistance to change. And one of the nicest theories about organizational change and behavior change, because basically, when you're doing things differently in an organization, you ask people collectively to do things differently, to change their collective behavior. So, one of the nicest models, providing the simple but yet very useful insight into how organizational behavior changes or gets stabilized, is Kurt Lewin's force field change model. He basically says the following thing: if we get into an organization or a work group and there's a way of doing things, so things are more or less stable, right? An existing state of being. It means that basically there's an equilibrium state, right? That's the thing you see in the middle. There's no change. Basically, there's a balance between forces that drive for change and forces resisting change. There's a balance, and once there's balance, there's no change. There's a stable situation. Okay? Now, along comes a decision to do something differently. It could be a strategic design. It could be, an anecdotal solution to a problem or whatever. It doesn't have to be just strategic, but we're looking at it from the strategic point of view. Along comes a new idea who said, okay, we need to do this together. There are driving forces. We do believe that the new strategy will make things better, will make work more efficient. We do believe that it will increase our effectiveness, that we'll do better things, that things will be more interesting perhaps, and so on. So a lot of forces to change. Good. But as you know from our recent unit, our previous unit, there will be also numerous forces, such as, oh, we've always done it this way, why change, right? Or will it influence me in a negative way, so I'm not for it, and so on and so forth. So, what in these terms does change management mean? Well, it means that the forces for change need to overcome the resisting forces. Now, should it be by force or coercion? So, by what we know from last time and still see today, no, no. Coercing change on your employees will basically make them accept the change temporarily and at the face level. It's not a deep-rooted change. Recruiting the employees to agree to change and to see how the change is for their own benefit and the benefit of the organization. That's the big deal. There's a lot of marketing here, or selling a good idea to people and showing them how, if they do it right, it will be great for everyone. Okay, so there's a lot of trying to excite people about things. And this has a lot to do, again, with what? Leadership. Leadership. How do we do this? Kotter, one of the bigger names in organizational change in general and organizational psychology, talks about 8 steps for leading changes. First of all, he says, create urgency. That is, stress the problem. Why do we need to change? Sell the idea that we cannot continue this way, or bad things are going to happen. Then build a coalition. Don't work alone. Don't come up with a finished idea to people. They will not know what happened and they'll not identify with what you have to offer. Who are you to, drop these things on me? No. Build a coalition. Build a group of people who are excited about this and who are willing to participate and later on push this forward. Then develop a vision. Remember? We start with a strategic point of view. What are we looking for? So we develop a vision. Where are we going? Before we even saying what we're doing, where are we going, what we're trying to achieve? Communicate the vision even before you have a plan. This is what we need to achieve. This is the goal we want to get. Now, plan how to do this, involve others, and create short-term wins. This is basically the key performance indicators, okay? Make those little milestones along the road that will say, if we reach this within a month or two, we're doing well, we're doing fine. So people get feedback that they are on the right path, that they are doing fine, and that the goal or the vision is within grasp, if you will. But also, look at this. He puts something from, he borrows something from Kurt Lewin's model. He says, okay, once you've made the changes, consolidate and anchor them. That is, create a change and then make that change the new routine, the new normal, if you will. How? Practice, support, practice, support, practice, support. No other way. It takes time, it takes effort and repetition. You can't just do, okay, that's the new things that we do. That's the new ways that we work. Here's some training for you, a workshop or whatever. Bye bye. No. Repeat, rehearse, help people who find it difficult, provide support. It will eventually happen. Let's summarize. What are the best practices in managing organizational change in general and managing strategic change? Are the best practices or are the most supported by research? So what I did here is I identified something like 10 to 20 various studies that look at organizational development practices in implementing a strategic plan, and I asked an AI engine to summarize what are the repeating points. So what points of best practices are mentioned but by more than one paper. So these are like the repeating ideas that are supported by the literature. Clear vision and strategic alignment. Remember, that's what we'll start with. People know where we're going and why. Strong, transparent communication. When there's change, there's a sense of uncertainty. And we need to reduce this. This is something that's very bad for the employees, very bad for the project of change. Communicate what is going on, what are the pros and cons of every decision, and what is going to happen. Active stakeholder engagement. Keep your people close by, involve them as much as possible to get the job done. Don't drop your ideas on their heads. Let them be a part of the decision-making process, the planning process, the implementation process. Leadership, sponsorship, and capability. Basically, as leaders, it's our job to empower our employees and to push them forward so they feel capable and excited about making the change. Structural changes. You know, when we're making functional changes, we may need to realign the organization. This may hurt because some people may lose their jobs or may have to move from one point to another, one location to another, etc. But when you explain how this serves a new program that's good for everyone, it may work. It may work. Proactive resistance management. That's what I meant by, meeting and mitigating resistance to change. You don't coerce, but you keep your feelers out. Do I have people resisting change? Do I see, slowdown, inacceptance, resistance, passive aggressive behavior? So I intervene, I explain, I communicate, I recruit them, the resistors, to be a part of the system of change. Employee engagement and empowerment said that continuous monitoring and reinforcement. Once you have made the change, again, practice, practice, practice. Repetition is key here, and support is key here. And of course, these changes are not the last to happen. If we made one serious strategic change, it means that this is going to happen sometime in the future. It could be soon, it could be in a further future way, but basically it means that our organization will, as it needed to do one strategic change, it will probably need to do more of these in the future. So build the organization, what the organizational processes and functions that will allow the organization to retest itself, to recheck itself, and when needed, adapt and create resilience in other ways. Or in other words, I mean that it will allow the organization to plan a new strategy when it's required again in the future. So that's basically it for today. Key points in how to manage and how to plan and then implement a large scale, deep change at the strategic level. Bye for now.